Work for idle hands. Osric jumped back as a shower of sparks burst from the device he was working on. Godric, propped up on one elbow with his chin in his hand in utter boredom, didn't even bother to laugh this time as two tech priests scuttled in with extinguishers, spraying down the small fire with blessed suppressant foam. Around the sanctum, robed Mechanicus adepts leafed through data scrolls and dog-eared tomes, reciting the canticles of reassurance to placate the machine spirits protesting Osric's unorthodox experiments. Osric had been refining his binaric rune tech for years, but now that the Void Revenants were fully operational, he was taking every opportunity to tweak and expand the designs. In the center of the chamber stood a battered suit of Mech Swevum warplate, its ceramite plates bristling with rune-shaped transmitters. Godric watched with a carefully neutral expression, waiting for either the next breakthrough or the next detonation. Osric tried again, this time remembering to deactivate the motive power spirit before applying the calibration probes. A searing arc of electricity leapt from the interface. One unfortunate tech adept yelped as he was flung across the room, crashing into a rack of catechisms on proper cable orientation. Another team of priests rushed to revive him while more extinguishers were deployed. Godric sighed so long and so deep it rattled his rebreather. Osric gave a short chuckle and tried a third time. This time the rune on the armor shimmered to a deep, unsettling blue. Across the room, a weapons servitor, stripped of its main armament for maintenance, abruptly stood to attention and recited the psalm of target acquisition 3 times before shutting down again. Osric straightened up, triumphant, and gestured grandly at the rune. Godric rose from his perch and approached, drawing his bolt pistol. He aimed carefully at the suit of armor, watching his targeter paint its red dot on the shoulder. The rune flared, pulsed red, then killed the bolt pistol's rangefinder altogether. Godric lowered the weapon with a grunt. "Humph. All right, I suppose it does work," he admitted. A nearby priest, holding a compress to a scorched cheek, smiled painfully. "The spirits appear compliant, my lord," he said, blinking through tiers of ozone. Osric had begun this runequest almost the moment he'd arrived on Nitwertha. The locals painted runic marks on their battle gear as both warding charms and identifiers, and Osric, ever the tinkerer, saw an opportunity to bring those markings to life. Unlike the psychic wards of the Librarius, his runes were entirely mechanical, data subroutines written in binaric cant etched into rune-shaped circuit plates bonded to ceramite, with litanies programmed directly into the microspirits. His first working prototype allowed a power armor Vox to cycle through a preset list of orders, effectively making a fallen Marine appear still alive and commanding after death. The system had first seen use among novice Astra Wigathane boarding teams. His second innovation involved an invasive Vox hack that could hijack enemy communication channels, replaying garbled orders and phantom voices to confuse the foe. Building on that, he adapted a standard Vox Thief module, adding what he called holy wires and deeply suspect prayers to inject scrap code pulses that could short-circuit enemy comms altogether. With a single toggle, a Void Revenant could silence an entire enemy network. His proudest creation was based on the Auspex integration system common to Void Crew armor. By repurposing its fiber optic signaling channels, usually used for command light codes, he created a system for projecting holographic decoys, full-body illusions of Marines stalking corridors or rooftops. A lone Revenant could appear to be a squad, or even an entire company, all without firing a shot. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. The illusions, coupled with the chapter's eerie green lenses, their heavy tread, and local myths of restless ancestors, were sure to give the Imperium's more superstitious citizens nightmares. And nightmares were a weapon as real as a bolt shell. But during the Ulgarith War, Osric found these systems nearly useless. The biomechanical Xenos made no use of Vox or Auspex. They hunted by scent and magnetic resonance. On Cragford Hold, outnumbered and outgunned, Osric had improvised scent burst pellets and biomist sprayers, clogging the Ulgarith sensory organs. It was crude, but it worked. Standing nearby, arms folded in a rigid gesture of disapproval, was Tech Cybernetica Magos Daniqua. She observed with a permanent scowl burned into her augmented features. "You are using officially sanctioned Mechanicus canticles for this?" she demanded. Her voice filtered through a layered vox that added a distinctly accusatory tone. Osric didn't even blink. I believe so, he lied shamelessly, knowing he could always add them later if needed. Godric, suppressing a laugh, stepped in. Yes, the proper rights are on record aboard Fiskbala Station, he said, managing a straight face. Archmagos Damia Voratrix has the approvals secured in the station archives. Magos Daniqua narrowed her optical lenses. She advanced to the Vox terminal and began a command override, linking directly to Voratrix's channel. Archmagos, she barked, I am requesting confirmation of these modifications logged by Brother Osric. For a moment there was only static, then Voratrix's voice came through, brittle as cut glass and twice as sharp. The hex of the dissident pulse cogitations are already approved and logged within multiple sanctioned subroutines, Voratrix snapped. I would have thought a tech cybernetica magos of your rank would know that, Daniqua. Daniqua stiffened, her vox clicking as she recalibrated her tone. Affirmative, Archmagos, she answered tightly, bowing even though Voratrix could not see her. Godric shot Osric a conspiratorial grin. Osric allowed himself a small smirk. Under the relentless reign of the Reach, in a place where nightmares took shape, a little sleight of hand in the name of victory was, after all, entirely appropriate. Both Godric and Osric avoided eye contact as they suppressed their laughter. Voratrix was not one to concern herself with minor misuses of technology, and they both knew perfectly well that by the time Tech Cybernetica Magos Daniqua personally inspected the archives, Voratrix would have rewritten the authorization, backdated it to the dark age of technology, and forged it in something resembling Malkador's own hand. The Magos switched off the Vox feed, letting static die away, her augmetic jaw set like iron. She turned back to them, suspicion still etched across every inch of her mechanized features. So, she began, voice full of prosecutorial promise, other than the hex of the dissident pulse rune, you are also implementing the vow of the Ghost Forge? She picked up a ceramite helmet with a shimmering blue rune set into the brow. Osric nodded, adopting the measured academic tone of a Mechanicus-trained initiate. The vow of the Ghost Forge uses an integrated holofield to project a ghostly simulacrum, confounding enemy targeting systems. The projector is built into every helm as standard. He triggered the rune, and 5 meters away, a full-sized image of a Void Revenant appeared. The holographic warrior checked his bolter, adjusted the seals on his helm, then took cover beside a scorched workbench as if preparing for a firefight. The illusion looked so real, the nearest tech adept made the sign of the cog before it winked out of existence. The Magos nodded, picking up a data scroll with 2 mechadendrites, eyes narrowing. Yes, I see from these notes that you claim redirection of holographic field projectors was first implemented by Ferrus Manus himself on Oradan. She looked straight at Osric, her gaze like a targeting laser. Osric held his best straight face. According to recorded doctrine, yes, these modifications are entirely within Mechanicus archives, he said. The Magos narrowed her eyes even further. And Ferrus Manus accomplished this on Oradan while also simultaneously prosecuting the 3 Stars campaign on Travana 3? Osric's mouth opened, but no words came out. He reached for another scroll, as if hoping to find a divine escape clause buried there. At that moment, Godric leaned forward with a groaning of hydraulics that rattled the tiles, lowering his massive dreadnought chassis down with painfully slow caution so that he could attempt a conspiratorial whisper, which to everyone present still boomed like a shipboard klaxon. Iron Hand's chapter records are confused from that period, he thundered as quietly as a dreadnought could. It was 5,000 years ago. Dates tend to blur. The Magos stared up at him, ears ringing slightly from the whisper. Osric bit the inside of his cheek to stop from laughing outright. Behind them, the sanctum's maintenance alcove was crowded with robed adepts, some with the black and red livery of Neatwertha, others in the bronze and gold scheme of Incaloris. They were politely exchanging complaints in hushed binaric tones. Your Archmagos has us repurposing void ship salvage for prayer caskets. Yes, but yours demands we account for every drop of oil in triplicate. True, the dreadnoughts break everything anyway. That is also correct. One younger adept from Neatwertha nodded in agreement with an Incaloris scribe. sharing an identical sigh before resuming reciting litanies over a misaligned actuator. Meanwhile, the Magos, jaw still locked in suspicion, pointed once more at the blue rune. "And you will produce the exact logica chant for the vow of the Ghost Forge, so that I may verify each syllable?" she demanded. Osric inclined his head with perfectly measured courtesy. "Of course, Magos. I will transmit it once the local spirits have been reconciled." Godric made an elaborate effort to lean in again, his clawed dreadnought fist cupped like an ear trumpet, voice rumbling in another painfully theatrical whisper. "Which means he'll make it up in about an hour," he boomed. The Magos slowly turned her head toward Godric, gave him a look best described as resigned horror, and then returned to scanning the scrolls. In the background, a Mechanicus hymn sputtered from a vox grill, chanting, "Spirit of copper, spirit of brass, forgive the liberties taken, for they are for the greater cause." Osric clapped his gauntlet against the dreadnought's plating, genuinely grateful for the comedic timing. Godric tried to straighten up again with a grinding mechanical whine, nearly colliding with a ceiling brace in the process, then gave up and simply stayed crouched, making the floor tiles creak under his armored bulk. Osric stepped back to his console, flicking off a few loose arcs of electricity, and forced his grin to subside. "Magos," he said with one last bow, "I promise you, all will be made correctly sanctified before deployment." The tech cybernetica Magos Daniqua sighed, clearly unconvinced, but no longer able to counter Voratrix's override. "Very well," she conceded, "but I will be watching." Godric gave a thunderous whisper in reply. "Of course you will." Osric looked to one of the adepts, who made a discreet signal with a bionic hand. With a satisfied nod, Osric turned to the tech cybernetica Magos. "Permit me to demonstrate, if you will," he announced, stepping back from the test chamber. A great hiss of chains and hydraulics sounded overhead. A Mechanicus adept, pale and trembling, was slowly lowered from the ceiling in a chain harness, a prayer of courage on his lips. As the harness settled, he was dropped directly into a seat bolted inside the back cavity of an Astartes power armor chassis, designed to let a human-sized operator pilot the warplate like a dreadnought. The test began. Godric, looming over them in his dreadnought sarcophagus, extended one colossal claw to draw his bolt pistol. A smaller mechadendrite curled around the trigger, delicately priming it. The tech priest inside the test armor activated a hidden rune, transmitting a pulse of scrap code into Godric's targeter systems. Immediately, two holograms stepped from either side of the real armored suit, advancing with bolters raised. Their projection modules flickered impressively through the haze of incense and smoke. Godric narrowed his optical lenses, tracking the illusions. "Very well," he rumbled, then fired. The massive bolt pistol barked, but every round missed, pinging harmlessly off armored plates and workshop walls. All three Marines froze, their systems locked in place. Osric coughed politely. "Of course," he explained, "we maintain our own target verification array." He pulled from a tool tray a clunky block of delicate fuses, copper coils, and mechanical switches, plugging it into a port on his own helm. "With this, I can distinguish which are real and which are projected." He turned toward the test armor again. "Observe." Raising a smaller bolt pistol, he aimed at the first illusion kneeling behind a crate of tools. He fired. The bolt round passed straight through it, and the image fizzled out. He then targeted another projected Marine using a wall mount for cover. Again, the bolt passed through harmlessly, the hologram winking away. Finally, he fired at the center figure, which was the actual armor containing the adept. The bolt hit true, slamming into the armored chest plate. Sparks sprayed out as the operator screamed, yanked violently from the chair, tumbling from the suit. "Medicaid," a voice bellowed across the chamber. Osric turned sheet white. Apologies," he stammered, rushing over, fumbling for his Medicaid kit. Godric tried to look sympathetic, which was difficult inside a 2-ton dreadnought. "Perhaps you should warn them next time," he boomed in a stage whisper so loud that rivets rattled from the ceiling. The tech cybernetica Magos Daniqua pinched the bridge of her nose, mechanical fingers squeaking on her augmetic features. At that exact moment, an abandoned warplate on the test stand began to emit a high-pitched whine, then caught fire. An automatic extinguisher exploded to life, drenching the entire wall in white foam. Osric tried desperately to explain. This wasn't supposed to happen, he offered, voice a frantic squeak. Daniqua's expression remained utterly stone, only the faintest twitch in one optics lens betraying the utter horror of what she was witnessing. Behind them, a chanting adept from Networtha turned to an Incoloris colleague in Binaric. At least your master only asks you to polish bolts. Yes, came the reply, but yours invents new ways to explode them. The two sighed in perfect harmony, returning to their hymn of machine soothing. Daniqua cast a glance at the armor now mounted on the assembly post, its rune circuits still faintly glowing. This new form of power armor, she began, eyeing Osric sharply, named Gastfret Wungehelm, which translates, rather clumsily, as Ghost in the Machine armor. Osric nodded eagerly. We usually just call it Gasthelm, or Ghost armor for short, he explained with a flourish. This innovation allows each battle brother to have far greater impact on the battlefield, truly embodying the chapter's spectral presence and mastery of psychological warfare. The tech cybernetica Magos still looked suspicious, though she could not pin down any true violation of the machine cult's tenets. Her gaze swept across the runesmith sanctum. The place was a chaotic swirl of scrolls, data slates, half-finished icons, and rune plates stacked in lopsided piles. She was used to the ordered halls of Incoloris, where every tool was laid out to the micron, every cogitator coated with a purity seal, and every adept knew their precise place in the grand schema. Yet here, despite the clutter, the machine spirits appeared calm. Rituals were observed, if not precisely, then at least faithfully. Godric, half-crouched to avoid putting a crater in the ceiling with his dreadnought hull, carefully fiddled with a tiny data slate using a fragile-looking mechadendrite, while Osric clumsily stacked a series of data scrolls back on a shelf. Around them, the priests and adepts of the sanctum moved to place the Gasthelm on the central servo lift, slotting its rune modules with practiced hands. Daniqua placed down the piece of ceramite she had been inspecting, her lenses narrowing. I will return to Incoloris, she stated coldly, and log all of this with the Mechanicus, as is the usual course. Osric turned, nearly spilling the entire stack of scrolls, which fluttered to the ground more slowly than they would on Nitwertha, thanks to Nithhelm's slightly weaker gravity. Godric raised one claw in a half-salute, half-wave. Enjoy your journey back, he boomed in a voice that was absolutely not subtle, even though he tried. The tech cybernetica Magos scowled. With one last, withering look around the chamber, she turned on her metal heels and stalked through the reinforced hatch, bound for her shuttle. Osric stood by the newly assembled Gasthelm-armored suit, watching her retreat into the corridor. Godric rumbled up next to him, mechanical servos clicking. Ghost armor, he repeated, optics bright with amusement. Osric shrugged with a grin. Gasthelm. Better than Gastfret Wungehelm in a hurry, he replied. Godric gave a slow nod of approval. Gasthelm it is, then. Better tell Bjornwolf. At the doorway, one of the younger priests leaned around the threshold, whispering, The Lady Tech Cybernetica Magos has departed, he confirmed with obvious relief. Good, Osric replied. He glanced around at the piled wires, burn marks, and scattered augmetic fittings littering the floor. All right, he sighed. Tidy this place up, he told the assembled adepts. It's a mess, almost impossible to work here. He tried to sound serious, but the grin that broke across his face gave him away completely. A sudden shadow blocked the sanctum's doorway. The priests near the hatch stepped back in a silent wave of fearful respect. Godric shifted in place, craning his dreadnought frame to look, while Osric adjusted his optics. Into the chamber stepped Archmagos Pyrovox. His immense form was cloaked in flowing crimson and black robes lined with cog-embossed trim, but beneath they glimpsed freshly polished black and silver armor, far cleaner than when they had last seen him. The glint of sacred silver machine etching along his chest plate caught the light, and his mechadendrites bristled with dignified menace. Godric boomed a greeting, leaning down so far to whisper that it still echoed off every wall. Archmagos Pyrovox, he thundered. Osric gave a stiff half-bow, still gripping a rune circuit. You just missed Tech Cybernetica Magos Daniqua, he offered with a sly smile. Pyrovox sighed in mock heartbreak, pressing one manipulator over what might have once been his heart. Oh no, he intoned theatrically. How terrible. Now I won't have to travel with her constant supervision all the way home. Osric couldn't help but chuckle. Godric rumbled a laugh that rattled every loose plate in the sanctum. Pyrovox straightened, optics glittering. However, he continued, I am not here merely to lament Daniqua's travel itinerary. From a pair of servo-bearers following behind him, he took up a massive hammerhead, the size of a dreadnought's entire fist, fashioned from adamant alloy, its polished surfaces etched with a refractor field lattice and crowned with a triple Mechanicus seal. For you, Brother Godric, he announced, as I promised, the battle hammer you requested. Godric leaned forward, claws flexing. A fine war mace, he said reverently. Pyrovox gestured, and a second, slightly smaller hammer was placed on a maglift. This one was sized for a power-armored Astartes, its shaft inlaid with runic script bearing the title Ronsmith, with a built-in storm bolter along the haft and a refractor generator recessed into the pommel. This, Pyrovox explained, is for you, Brother Osric, in thanks for overseeing the reconstruction of my command chamber after the unpleasantness on Incoloris. I had it blessed with your chapter's new crest, he added, pointing to the stylized warg's head engraved in silver across the hammer's strike plate. Osric stepped forward, eyes wide with boyish wonder. Magnificent, he breathed. Truly magnificent. He traced a finger over the warg motif, pride beaming from every servo. It suits the Revenants perfectly. Godric rumbled in agreement, already imagining the hammer's swing. Osric looked back at the Archmagos, a wry grin forming. You could have sent this with Cybernetica Daniqua, he teased, raising an eyebrow. So why did you come all the way here, Pyrovox? The Archmagos smiled, with the same dangerous charm that had let him survive 1,000 Mechanicus feuds. Brother Osric, he replied smoothly, if I relied on Daniqua to deliver something without inspecting every cog and wire for potential heresy, you'd see your hammer in 100 years. Osric laughed, as did Godric, the dreadnought's vox thundering enough to send a few of the priests diving for cover. Pyrovox leaned closer, voice lowering, though still plenty loud enough to carry across the sanctum. And besides, he added, I may have another matter to discuss with you, one best kept off official vox channels. Osric's eyes narrowed, and Godric tilted his dreadnought chassis. Pyrovox's grin widened, the grin of a Magos who knew exactly how to dance along the very edge of acceptable heresy. Pyrovox seemed distressed, or at least as close to distressed as a being of cables and adamantine could appear. His voice box warbled slightly as he hesitated, folding two of his servo claws behind his back in a curiously human gesture. I also came, he began awkwardly, to congratulate Beornwulf on his new chapter, and to give my regards to Archmagos Damia Voratrix. His optics twitched left and right. But, he continued with obvious reluctance, there is a small matter, a concern, partly about the security of my forge and partly for the peace of the Reach. He shifted again as though uncomfortable. You see, he explained carefully, Incoloris space borders Manifold Dawn. It is our longest frontier. To the south lies the Squat Holds, and we have had pirate raids in that sector since humans first walked these stars. Godric nodded gravely, while Osric folded his arms. Pyrovox sighed, a mechanical hiss. Normally this would be routine, but this is more delicate. He glanced around to ensure no priests were within earshot. My navy has been performing interdiction operations along the Manifold Dawn border, he went on. We tracked one raider to a small ecclesiarchy colony. That colony is officially under Manifold Dawn's jurisdiction and governed by the Five Tower cult. Osric's eyes sharpened. The Five Tower cult? Pyrovox nodded grimly. The dominant faction of the Ministorum on Manifold Dawn, yes, and Incoloris cannot move against them without potentially confronting the full might of Manifold Dawn. He paused to let that sink in. Manifold Dawn's fleet, he reminded them, is the largest in the Reach. Should we act, we would be denounced as heretics by the ecclesiarchy, and that would spiral into a sector-wide war. Osric glanced at Godric, whose dreadnought frame hummed with a worried whine. So, Osric pressed, now that the Void Revenants are in the Reach, you want us to investigate. Pyrovox bobbed his head faintly, optics glowing. Exactly. If an Astartes chapter investigates, it moves the blame from Incoloris. You are outside the Ministorum's political reach, and your presence would be seen as a stabilizing imperial action rather than an attack from a rival forge. Osric raised an eyebrow. Why come to us, Pyravox? The Archmagos seemed genuinely sheepish, folding another pair of mechadendrites in what might have been a nervous tick. Because, he admitted, I know you, Osric. I do not know the Void Revenants, not yet, anyway. And in this galaxy, it is not what you can prove, but who you know. He hesitated, as if embarrassed. Besides, Archmagos Damiavoratrix suggested it would be more palatable if the matter came from you. I suspect Chapter Master Bjornwolf would not look kindly on being asked to start a war with a local forge as his first act. Godric let out a thunderous, iron-edged chuckle. Astartes politics, he growled. Always a delicate business. Osric sighed, glancing toward the gas-helm suit, now fully assembled on its stand, rune plates glowing with eerie power. Well, he said, it looks like we are ready, just in time. Pyravox gave a thin, mechanical smile, optics flickering. Indeed, he agreed, just in time.